Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Lasaniziris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. Today we'll interrupt the series of presenting games suggested to me by my Facebook friends because one more game of the grecochess online tournament has been completed. And in this video, we are going to show this game. And this game is from Group 2. In Group 2, we had two players. baraks7 from Israel and Mgc-89 from Brazil that were competing for the first place. One game had already been completed with baraks7 with the white pieces having won the game. Now it's the other way around. Mgc-89 will have the white and baraks7 will have the black. And the situation is the following. If Mgc-89 wins, then both of them advance. If the game ends in a draw, or if baraks7 wins, then baraks7 will be the only one advancing to the next round. And we're going now to look at what happened. We're going to share the screen with you from chess.com, but not the entire screen. As you see here, we only share the relevant part on the left, and this is because the analysis is going to show the next moves and will also show the you can also see how the game is going to evolve, and we don't want to spoil the surprise. We want to keep the viewers interested until the end what is going to happen. You see here on the screen Mgc-89 from Brazil has a white pieces whose online rating is 1217, facing baraks7 from Israel whose rating is 1670. So clearly this makes baraks7 the favorite, I would say, but we've seen many times in the past that favorites don't always win. And let the game will begin. And Mgc-89 starts with a book move. You see the book here, but it is a rare book move. The pawn moves to only one square instead of two square. And the comment says moving the pawn one square in the first move doesn't control as much central space as it would by advancing to the e4 square. Usually you do this if you want your next move to be pawn to d4 and you want e3 to provide extra support to d4. That is how Mgc-89 started. Let's see baraks7. Pawn to g6, preparing to fianchetto the bishop from f8, so the bishop from f8 can reach g7 and control the long diagonal that goes from a1 to h8. That's supposed to be the hyper-modern way of thinking in chess. The logic called hyper-modern has a history of about 100 years since it was first invented and being used. Next move for Mgc-89, the computer says that's not a mistake, but it's not the best move either. You don't want unnecessarily to move pawns on the wings, on the A or H files. You waste a move. The computer would clearly recommend the pawn goes to d4, and you are already outside opening theory. But still, you see 0.00 the evaluation, but just white just blundered the. Before that, they had 0.3, you see, by being first. Now, basically, they blundered the fact that they started first. But let's see how game will continue. And baraks7 continues his fianchetto idea. Bishop goes to g7 and the best move. You see the star, it says it's the best move. You see also the arrow agrees with the move. Bishop to c4 for Mgc-89, the computer doesn't like it. Well, you develop a bishop, but the comment says that this permits the opponent to take a bishop. Of course, if pawn goes to d5, the bishop has to move again. You don't like this thing. Black develops while white has to move the same thing again. That's why you see already baraks7 has an advantage of 0.5 just from the third move. Pawn to d5, exactly. That is what baraks7 should do. You see, this is the best move. The arrow agrees the move. So Mgc-89 has to move again the bishop, while baraks7 will continue developing. Bishop went to b3. Good is the computer, not the best. Barak7 advantage becomes now 0.8. Knight to f6, maybe not the best. The computer would rather have pawn to c5, but it is an excellent move. You see the handshake, meaning excellent move. Knight to 3 for Mgc-89, the best move, develops the knight. And castling, kingside castling for Barak7. Once again, not the best move. Computer would like the pawn to go to c5 and exert pressure on the d4 square, but still it's an excellent one. And we continued we completed the first 5 moves with Barak7 having an advantage of 0.6. Pawn to h3 for Mgc-89. Well, yes, you stop the bishop from c8 going to g4 and pinning the knight, but the computer thinks that is just a fine move. That's fine. And nothing else. Computer would rather have the pawn going to c4 for Mgc-89 continuing the development, and computer, of course, believes that it's unlikely that white is going to blunder the queen by moving the knight after it's pinned, so it's unnecessary protection. That's what the computer thinks, at least. Now pawn goes to c5, and now that Barak7 did it, the computer would like Barak7 to have done it before, but now it is only excellent and not the best. Now the computer would rather have the pawn going to b5. Knight to e5. Move the second piece twice, and the comment says moving the same piece twice in the opening isn't good for development. So Mgc-89 does something that is not ideal. You'd rather have anything else, anything to help you developing, instead of moving the same piece twice. And also there's another problem. If the knight of f6, the black's knight, moves anywhere, for example, e8 or h8 would be white sending to the top, to the 8th rank, maybe h5 or something like that, then the bishop on e5 is threatened. But let's see how game is going to continue. A knight to e4, exactly for Barak7. So the knight on e5, white's knight is threatened by the bishop on g7, is not protected. What can white do now? Perhaps move the pawn to f3, you attack my knight, I attack your knight, but this is going to weaken. The knight goes to g3, and you have both the rook on h1 and the knight on e5 being attacked. What else can the knight go out of the h squares? Nope, 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 nope. Perhaps, impossible, perhaps. I'm saying perhaps in the sense that, yes, you don't lose material immediately. For example, if it goes here, bishop takes, pawn takes, you don't want, or even queen takes. You don't want queen to come out early. If you go here, you may exchange the bishop and have double pawns, meaning there are 6 impossible squares and 2 perhaps. Not what you like. But let's see how Mgc-89 will react. It is a blunder, queen to f3. You see the 2 question marks in the red circle? This means blunder. If there was only 1 question mark, it would have been a simple mistake. Why blunder? Because the knight is on e5 is completely lost. And you don't want your queen to come up early. So you see, move 8, and already Barak7 has an advantage of 4.9. And yes, Barak7 is going to grab the knight. So now you see the +3 that Barak7 already has material advantage. Until now, had a better position, but the material was equal. Let's continue the game. Pawn to c4 for Mgc-89. Excellent move. At least he stops black's pawn going to c4 and trapping, maybe not exactly trapping, but constraining the white bishop. That's why the computer thinks it's excellent. The best have been pawn to e3 to attack the knight on e4 and also give more space to the bishop on c1. Pawn to e6 for Barak7. The computer comment says this protects an under-defended pawn that is under attack. It's excellent, but not the best. Pawn to h4 for Mgc-89. A solid choice, is the computer. Yep, perhaps Mgc-89 might be able to launch a kingside attack. Knight to d7 for baraks7, that completes the development. And we completed the first 10 moves, and after the loss of the knight, baraks7 has both material advantage of +3 and also has here overall advantage even higher of 4.8. You see it here. Continue now. Pawn to d3, good move for, excellent in fact, for Mgc-89, threatens the knight on e4, and baraks7 has to think what to do with the knight instead of doing anything else. Knight goes back to f6, save a square. Pawn, Mgc-89 wins a pawn, or not wins, grabs a pawn on d5. Of course, if you're behind in material, you don't want to trade. You want to do something else. That's why the computer would rather have the pawn go to h5 and open the black king. The only hope for white is if they can launch a successful attack against the black king. And of course, baraks7 takes back. Bishop to d2. Bishop is developed for Mgc-89. Once again, computer would rather have at this point, instead of doing regular developing moves, continue the attack against the black king. And baraks7 wins a pawn like that on b2 and threatens the rook on a1, and Mgc-89 is not going to lose the rook. They send it to a2 and threaten the bishop on b2. Bishop goes back to e5, and now the Mgc-89 is going to win a pawn, a nice central pawn on d5. And baraks7 wants to do the exchanges, being ahead in material. And in this way, we completed the first 15 moves. I mean, baraks7 seems to have a +6 material advantage, but immediately they should lose the knight. Queen attacks it. Overall, they have 5.3 advantage. That is significant. And yes, queen takes it back. Rook goes to b8 for baraks7. One more piece joins the action, says the stock v16, that is the computer engine that provides evaluations. And to make it clear, the players during the game had no access to any computer software. This we see it only after the fact as I'm presenting the game. And hopefully the players also reviewed their games on their own to learn for the future. Knight to c3, knight is developed for Mgc-89. Almost everything has been developed other than castling. Queen to f6 for baraks7 that wants to launch an attack against the white king. Knight to e4 for Mgc-89 and threatens the queen on f6. So baraks7, instead of continuing the attack, needs to think what to do with the queen. And really needs to be careful, because if you put it on a square, for example, like f5, then knight from e4 can easily go to d6 and have a great position, threaten the queen. But if they put it d7 or h8, then the queen is a little bit, how can I say, not is on a long diagonal, but acts like a bishop. Let's see what baraks7 is going to do. Queen to b6. This has a threat. The queen could go to b1 with a check. And after white response, of course, you cannot reply to check with casting, but no matter what they do, basically the king can go to e2 or to bishop to c1 will be lost. They would threaten the rook on a2, but the queen on d5 protects it. But at least they would place a constraint on the white queen. Let's see what's going to happen. Castling, great move, excellent move for baraks7. Great, I call it, but it's not the grade that the computer would consider great. They have a much higher standard. It's a good idea, so they don't have to worry about checking. Bishop to g7 for Barak7, the bishop was not under threat yet, but was only protected by the knight on d7, with attacked by the queen on d5. You don't want to constrain your knight because while it's on d7, the bishop on c8 has nowhere to go. That's how you think in chess. I'm explaining the thoughts. That's how at least you should think in chess, not just the immediate, what's happening immediately, but a little bit further down the road. Pawn to f4 for Mgc-89. Excellent moves as a computer because you give more space to your rook. Of course, you may weaken the diagonal from a7 to g1, but being down one piece, you have to think, you have to take some risks if you want to come back. Because if you play conservatively and you end up in the ending a piece down, your chances are very low. Unless you can get rid of all the pawns and have the opponent a king and the bishop or a knight versus a king that you can get a draw. Queen goes to c6. You are ahead in material, you want exchanges. That was the thought of Barak7. And excellence is a computer, but when you're down in material, you don't want exchanges because now that the queens will be gone, but let's see before that what's happening. Because you completed 20 moves, Barak7 advantage has fallen a little bit to 4.4, but still a significant one. After the exchange of the queens, yes, Barak7 has doubled his pawns this on the c file. On the other side, the rook on b8 controls an open file. But you don't want to change when you're behind. The reason being is that now there is no chance that black may accidentally blunder the queen. Of course, white could also blunder the queen, but since you're down a piece either way or other, that would not affect the result. Rook to c2 for Mgc-89. It's in a semi-open file that only has black pawns. There are no white pawns. Rook to b3 for Barak7 attacks the pawn on a3, and also the pawn on d3. Two pawns are attacked. Knight to c5 for Barak7. And now we have exchanges on c5. And what's happening is that Mgc-89 is able to decrease the material deficit from +3 to +2, but not for too much because Barak7 will take the pawn on d3. In fact, Barak7 has two choices, either d3 or a3. By taking on d3, first of all, the rook is in an open file, no pawns on the d file, and second, they threaten the bishop on d2 that needs to do something. And let's see what this something is going to do. Bishop goes to c1. Ideally, you want to do b4. In this way, you have both pawn and bishop protecting each other, and the bishop can x-ray the rook on f8. c1, you just save the bishop for the day, but nothing more than that. But of course, perhaps what Mgc-89 was thinking, if bishop goes on b4, then the pawn on e3 is lost. Bishop on b7 for Barak7, and we completed the first 25 moves. 4.5 is the advantage for Barak7. Significant one, but it has not increased at all from the beginning of the game, from when Barak7 got the extra piece. Ideally, you want, if you're ahead, to increase your advantage. Keeping it stable is a little risky. Barak7 is one mistake or one blunder away from the game being tied. Let's see how game continues. Rook to a5 for Mgc-89, attacking the pawn on a7. Pawn goes to a6, so now the pawn for now is safe. The bishop on b7 is not safe, but Mgc-89 cannot directly attack it. None of the bishops can go to either 7th rank or to the b file for now. In the meantime, if they try to do so, Barak7 has all the time in the world to either move the rook to b8 or the bishop to another square, perhaps to c8. Rook to f5, good idea for Mgc-89, trying to desperately attack the black king. Of course, without queens, this possibility becomes even more remote. That's why Mgc-89 should not have exchanged the queens. I know the thought of many players, especially with low ratings, if they lose a piece, they want to exchange the queens thinking, I already lost a piece. I don't want to lose the future, to lose the queen in the future and make things even worse. But practically better keep the queens if possible. Bishop to f6 for barak7. Attacks the pawn on h5. Pawn from f5 takes the pawn on g6 for Mgc-89. Opens the space in front of the black king. Pawn takes back, of course. Pawn to e4 for barak7. So the pawn is safe from the rook, and the bishop on c1 is not constrained on c1 any longer. But computer thinks that this leads to losing a rook. How can black win the rook? The rook on a5, yes, the position is not very good. But if it's threatened by the bishop from f6 going to either d8 or c3, the rook has squares to go. It's not clear at all how this could happen. But clearly you don't want your rook on a5 having not too many squares to go. How many squares does it have? It has squares on a4 and also c5. It has only 2 squares to go. It could be lost in the future, but I don't see any immediate loss. Bishop to d4 with a check for barak7. It's a great move. You want your bishop in the center, especially the check. Will this lead to winning a rook? This wins material, says the computer evaluation. Let's see how the material is going to be won. Yep, it's not the bishop that will take the rook on a5. The rook that will be lost is the rook on f1, because no matter where the king goes, the king has how many moves? Either goes to h1 or h2, and then the f1 rook is lost, or goes to f2. In this case, black is not going to win the exchange, but in fact, if it goes to f2, immediately the rook is lost, because you have rook on f8 and rook on d4 attacking the white rook that is pinned and cannot move. Of course, you could also have rook going to d1 check and winning even more material. But clearly, Mgc-89 is going to lose at least a rook. King goes to h2. Computer would rather have the rook cover it. And let's see. From now on, the 6.59 advantage becomes m7. The letter M that you see here means mate in 7 moves, meaning under best play, if both players play their best, in 7 moves at most, barak7 is going to checkmate Mgc-89. But only if barak7 plays the very best move, 7 best moves in a row. Will this happen? From my own experience, if it is m1, 2, perhaps 3, I can see it. 7, I have missed it many times. To begin with, of course, barak7, this is an obvious move, rook takes rook, and now it's m6. Pawn to e5 for Mgc-89. It is excellent, but not the best, and the result is that this becomes m3. 3 best moves for barak7, and he checkmated. Is this going to happen? Let's give a look. Well, barak7, let's play it safe. Let's win the bishop while we can, and let's not gamble on a check. The computer would rather have the bishop going to g2. The result is that the m3, instead of becoming m2, becomes m4. But still, you have a mating attack. In practice, if you cannot calculate all the way till the mating, and if you have some free material to grasp, get it. I'm not sure who said it, but one of the greatest chess players in the past said, if you have to choose between a mating attack and immediately grabbing the rook, grab the rook. The rook will always be, the rook will definitely be there for you to win. The mating attack, meaning it's a long attack, you may have miscalculated. And it happens very frequently when the opponent sees a resource that you never expected. For me, once it happened, I was playing against computer software, and I was so excited that my combination was going to checkmate the computer. Of course, it was at the low level, not at the very high. And at the very last moment, when I was just going to checkmate, I found out that the rook that was going to deliver the checkmate was pinned and could not move. If you calculate the long combination, it may happen. The piece that you are planning to use to checkmate might have been pinned. Just one example. Pawn goes to e6. Desperately, white is hoping for a miracle, promoting the pawn if black is careless. That is what Mgc-89 was hoping. But baraks7 is going instead to place the rook on e1. Again, from m3 we go to m4 instead of placing the bishop on g1, but baraks7 just wanted to stop this pawn from promoting. You check on g1, you never know what could happen later. The king could escape on... It cannot go here. It can only go to h1 and have a discovered check. Then to f2, king goes to... and then if it goes here, yes, and then a rook could go to h3. I'm trying to see how it cannot go to h3. But maybe the pawn, so that after that there's a pin and the rook can go to h3. But baraks7 played safely, and at this point, Mgc-89 gave up any hope. And baraks7 wins both games, both with white and with black, and has advanced. But before we go to the tables, let's see the review of the game. I will change the screen. And here we are. The reason I said before a part of the screen is because otherwise you would have seen this graph here that shows exactly how the game would end, and I don't want to spoil the surprise. You see that Mgc-89 had 76.4 accuracy, baraks7 had 87.7. Their ratings, they played as if Mgc-89 had a rating of 900. Sometimes you are overwhelmed when playing a stronger opponent and you may play below your actual level. So maybe that's what happened with Mgc-89. So no reason for Mgc-89 to feel embarrassed or upset or anything like that. It's a great experience. And baraks7, wonderful performance, 1900. Congratulations for making to the final round. Let's see the various categories. No brilliant or great moves. Best 11 for baraks7, 5 for Mgc-89, excellent 17 for baraks7, and 15 for Mgc-89. Good. 6 for Mgc-89, 3 for baraks7. One book move each of them very early from the second move. After an inaccuracy from Mgc-89, the players left the book, quote unquote book. And in the, let's call it negative category, or things that you'd rather have zeros, have as small numbers as possible. Actually, Mgc-89 had 3 inaccuracies, 1 mistake and 1 blunder, while baraks7 had zeros all over. And let's see what is happening now. This concludes the description of the game. And we're here, grecochess. Let's see what's happening in all the 4 groups. Group 1, Maxim Govorukha is still waiting to see if Harding Achievements is going to play. You see here that Hunting Achievements has 2 weeks of vacation remaining. So will during the next 2 weeks Hunting Achievement play a move and start the game rolling, or will Hunting Achievements just time out all the games? Let's see. Group 2, baraks7. Congratulations, baraks7 from Israel becomes the next finalist. Group 3, it's myself, the Harry from Greece versus the Line from Hungary. These two will compete for the next spot. Everything is going to be decided in the two games that will face each other. And Group 4, my king from Italy has already advanced to the final round. And this concludes the coverage of the Greco chess, but let's see what's happening at the other tournament, the Underwater Moonlight. Let's see all the pairings. In Group 9, we have an unfortunate development. You may remember at some point Hikaru Carlsenthal was leading with a great advantage, but his account was closed for fair play. What this means that players are expected not to use computer assistance, and it seems that the algorithm of chess.com believes that Hikaru Carlsenthal used computer assistance and closed their account. So really, I'd like to advise everyone there is no reason to do so. We are here to learn. How can you learn if you have a computer playing your moves and you just copy the moves of the computer? What's going to happen is that Hikaru Carlsenthal is not going to lose these 5 points. The players that lost these 5 games will have their ratings points returned to them, but in the tournament, Hikaru Carlsenthal will keep these 5 points. Of course, cannot advance with these 5 points, but the other players, the other 5 players, will be deprived of a point, and this could affect perhaps who continues. But let's see the other groups. Group 1, Lotus Time Chess from Japan, 11 and a half, and no one is perfect. Group 2, Spider 99 from here. From Croatia, from Egypt, I'm sorry, it's the second time I do the same mistake. He's leading with 10 points in 11 games. Anybody perfect? Nobody perfect. Group 3, the organizer and my channel subscriber, Zanilo from Italy, is leading with 10 points. Maxim Govoruka from the Ukraine, who is also participating in Greco chess and may advance the finals, has 6 wins in 6 games and has a perfect score. Group 4, Iraq Lion from Iraq is leading with 6 wins in 6 games. Vivaladi via 5 from India has 4 wins. And who else is perfect? And Aaron Nightmare from Mexico is perfect with 2 wins. As we go on, the number of perfect players will become smaller and smaller. Group 5, we have a three-way tie. Per Perez from Palestine, Imam Mamti from Indonesia, and Sinan Fu from Greenland are leading with 10 points in the tie-breaking. Per Perez has 43 tie-breaking points versus 42 from AMMT and 38 from Sinan Fu. Anybody perfect? AMMT from Indonesia has 10 wins, is the only perfect one. Group 6, Mathis B 2008 from France, in spite of a timeout, is still leading with 12 points. David 8 by 8 by 8 by 8 has 6 wins, has no point losses. Group 7, Gerald F 66 from the Ukraine is leading with 12 points. Tragis from Brazil is perfect with 10 wins. Group 8, my group. I'm leading with 6 points, but since in addition to the 6 wins, I have 5 losses, or maybe even more than 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 losses. Yep. I have 6 wins and 7 losses. Things don't seem to be going that well for me. But just because I have played more games, I have more points than I'm leading. The best I can achieve is 9 points. Let's see if with 9 points, if I can get these 9 points and if I can advance. Maybe, but for the time being, the chances are against me. Anybody perfect? Let's give a look. Alto Temni from the Netherlands, I think. Yes, he has two wins, is the only perfect one, unless you consider Mars 404 from Kenya that has yet to complete a game, so he has had not lost any points. And Group 9, where Hikaru Carlsenthal had the account closed for fair play violation, we have Joey Yo S. Jake from South Korea has 6 points, is leading. Who is perfect? Steam Rockets from Australia, Lua 000 from Spain have 5 wins, 5 points. Lessa 4101 from Brazil has 3 wins, 3 games. And that is what's happening with the two tournaments. We'll continue with the next videos. They're going to be the games of Yorgos Sioris, who was a close friend of Achilles Zographos, and he passed away. And Achilles would like to show these two games of his close friend Yorgos to honor his memory. We just had one game, and today he sent me a second game. We're going to have these two in the next two videos, assuming nothing dramatic happens in the online tournaments. And then we have one or two games from Costas Hiembos. And for the time being, this will complete the games from my Facebook friends. Then I'm going to present the games I have played in recent tournaments. The one in the Connecticut State Championship it took place in Hartford, and the other one in the Chessanity that took place in Jericho, Long Island. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you have not subscribed, you may want to consider doing so. And we'll see you at the next video. I'm Harry Laseniziris. This is my Greco Chess channel. Goodbye.